The housekeeper had been tormented by the incessant cries of the millionaire's daughter every night. Her heart ached for the child, whose sobs echoed through the opulent mansion like a haunting melody. One fateful evening, driven by a mixture of concern and curiosity, she stealthily crept into the girl's room, only to be struck with utter horror at the ghastly scene unfolding before her. The feeble light of dawn had just begun to pierce the darkness when Clara awoke to the jarring blare of her alarm clock. The shrill sound pierced the quiet, dragging her from a restless slumber. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. With heavy eyes, Clara blinked awake, gradually adjusting to the muted glow that permeated the tiny, cramped quarters she occupied within the Johnson estate. The chill in the air was palpable, and she could see her breath drifting in ethereal wisps before her. Another day stretched out before her, a relentless cycle of duty and toil that she faced with a weary resignation. Clara's feet touched the cold, unyielding floor, and she shivered involuntarily. In a hurried motion, she slipped on the threadbare slippers that had seen better days. She made her way to the tiny, austere bathroom attached to her room. There, she scrubbed her face and donned the gray and white uniform that had become an extension of her being over the years. Staring into the grimy mirror, she saw the reflection of a woman in her mid-30s, her brown hair pulled back into a strict bun, hazel eyes shadowed by fatigue but still sharp with awareness. The fine lines etched around her eyes and mouth bore silent testimony to countless years of unrelenting labor. When had time carved these lines upon her face? She pondered, gently tracing the furrows with trembling fingers. It felt like mere moments had passed since she first arrived at the mansion, brimming with youthful ambition and dreams. She shook her head, pushing away these melancholic reflections, and left her quarters to descend the narrow, winding service stairs. The mansion was still cloaked in heavy silence, its affluent occupants ensconced in their luxurious slumber. In the pristine kitchen, Clara commenced her grueling routine. She meticulously prepared the opulent breakfast that Mr. Johnson demanded each morning: eggs Benedict with an artful touch, freshly toasted artisanal bread, tangy, freshly squeezed orange juice, and a steaming pot of rich Colombian coffee. The aroma of the brewing coffee enveloped the kitchen, a fleeting comfort amidst the drudgery. Clara inhaled deeply, savoring this brief moment of solace before she continued her arduous work. At precisely 7:30 a.m., she ascended the stairs with the breakfast tray in hand, her knock on the master bedroom door soft yet imbued with an undercurrent of dutiful persistence. "Come in, Mr." Johnson's deep, commanding voice resonated from within the opulent confines of the bedroom. Clara, her heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and resignation, pushed open the door and stepped into the lavishly appointed room. Mr. Johnson, a distinguished middle-aged man with graying hair and eyes that gleamed with an icy detachment, was seated on the edge of the grand king-size bed. A laptop was open before him, casting a pallid light on his face as he stared intently at the screen. "Good morning, Sir," Clara greeted him, her voice carefully modulated to maintain a tone of professionalism despite the underlying fatigue. Without lifting his gaze from the laptop, Mr. Johnson gave a cursory wave towards the bedside table. "Place the breakfast there," he directed absently, his eyes still locked on the digital world before him. Clara moved with practiced efficiency, setting the tray down on the table. The air was a heady blend of Mr. Johnson's opulent cologne and the crisp scent of freshly laundered linens, a stark contrast to the warm, inviting aroma of the coffee and toast she had just prepared. Mr. Johnson's gaze finally shifted from the screen, his eyes cold and scrutinizing. "Should I remind you that Mrs. Johnson returns from her trip this evening?" he inquired, his tone clipped and unyielding. Clara's response was immediate and precise. "No, sir. I've already ensured that her room has been meticulously cleaned and will be preparing her favorite dinner for her arrival tonight. A brief nod from Mr. Johnson signaled his approval. "Very well. You may go," he said tersely, his attention already drifting back to his laptop. Clara inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement and exited the room, closing the door with a soft click. As she descended the stairs, her shoulders finally relaxed, and she allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief. A pang of melancholy washed over her. Sometimes she pondered with a tinge of sadness. It felt as though Mr. Johnson perceived her as nothing more than an invisible component in his well-oiled machine, a mere servant in the grand tapestry of his life. The hours of the day slipped by in a relentless whirlwind of chores, scrubbing, washing, ironing, and cooking. Clara moved through the sprawling mansion like a shadow, her presence almost imperceptible. The other staff members, the butler, the gardener, the driver, were each lost in their domains, their interactions with her limited to the barest of acknowledgments. As evening descended, Clara was left utterly drained. Her feet ached with deep, gnawing pain, her back throbbed with each movement, and the thought of collapsing into her narrow bed was a tantalizing promise. She was on the verge of finishing the last of the laundry when an unsettling sound reached her ears, a faint, barely audible noise emanating from the upper floors. Clara paused, straining to discern the source of the disturbance. There it was again, a muted, heart-wrenching sob that conveyed a deep, almost unbearable despair. Her heart raced, a pang of worry seizing her. The sobs were coming from Emily's room, Mr. Johnson's daughter. Although Clara had heard similar cries before, they had never been so filled with raw, agonizing emotion. "It's none of my concern," she murmured to herself, trying to focus on folding the sheets. "I shouldn't involve myself in the family's private matters yet." As the minutes ticked by, the sobs persisted, growing more anguished and desperate. Clara's chest tightened with a growing sense of unease, a profound empathy stirring within her. Despite the internal conflict, her compassion still burning after years of diligent service compelled her to act. Setting the final folded sheet neatly in the closet, Clara left the laundry room, her resolve firming with each step. The hallway was cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the ghostly glow of moonlight filtering through the tall windows. As she moved toward Emily's room, her heart pounded with apprehension and determination. She knew the risk she was taking. She could face reprimand or worse for stepping beyond her bounds. Yet an inner drive, a sense of moral duty and unyielding compassion spurred her onward, compelling her to uncover the source of the child's torment. Clara stood frozen before Emily's door, the weight of her uncertainty heavy on her shoulders. The sobs she had heard earlier were now unmistakably louder, their anguished wails interspersed with desperate, ragged breaths that seemed to claw at Clara's heart with an agonizing grip. Each sound was a stab to her conscience, making her question her very purpose here. "What am I doing?" she thought, her hand trembling as it hovered just above the doorknob. The heaviness of the moment pressed down on her like a physical force. "This isn't my place," she reminded herself, a familiar pang of hesitation tugging at her resolve. Yet another sob, so imbued with pain and despair that it seemed to echo the very essence of suffering, made her heart ache with empathy. The sheer intensity of the emotion was overwhelming, and tears blurred her vision, mixing with her growing sense of distress. Driven by a force she could neither understand nor resist, Clara raised her hand and knocked gently but firmly on the door. The sound was soft yet resonant, breaking the oppressive silence that hung in the air like a shroud. "Miss Emily," she called out with a voice that trembled slightly, barely more than a whisper. "Are you all right?" The moment she spoke, the crying ceased abruptly, and a heavy, almost tangible silence filled the space between them. Clara stood there, her heart racing with an intensity that felt almost physical, each beat echoing the uncertainty and apprehension she felt. The hallway around her seemed to darken, the shadows stretching out as if to envelop her in their gloom. For a split second, the idea of turning around, of walking away and pretending she hadn't heard the cries, seemed to offer a cruel but tempting escape. "What am I doing?" she thought again, her mind whirling with escalating panic. What if Mr. Johnson discovers I've intruded into her private space? Her thoughts were cut off by the soft, trembling voice that emerged from the other side of the door, fraught with an uncertainty that contrasted starkly with Emily's usual poise and self-assuredness. "Clara, is that you?" The fragility in Emily's voice was so profound, so heart-wrenching, that it tightened Clara's chest with a profound ache. Every fiber of her being was screaming to offer comfort, to bridge the chasm of emotional pain she sensed beyond the door. Swallowing hard against the lump that had formed in her throat, Clara steadied herself and replied, her voice surprisingly calm despite the storm raging within. "Yes, miss. I heard some distressing noises and was deeply concerned. May I come in?" The request hung in the air, suspended in the heavy silence that followed. Each second seemed to stretch into an excruciating eternity as Clara waited, her breath held in anxious anticipation. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching, each step a reminder of the uncertainty that lay ahead. Clara's heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination as she prepared herself for whatever awaited her on the other side of that door. Gradually, the doorknob turned with a slow, deliberate creak, and the door eased open, revealing Emily in a state that jolted Clara with surprise and deep concern. The transformation was so stark, it was almost unbelievable. Emily, who was always the epitome of elegance with her designer clothes and flawless makeup, now appeared as a mere shadow of her former self. Her usually lustrous, perfectly styled blonde hair was a tangled mess, falling around her face in lifeless strands. Her once bright blue eyes, brimming with vitality, were now swollen, red, and framed by dark circles that spoke of many sleepless nights. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she took in Emily's disheveled appearance. The young woman was clad in a peach-colored silk pajama, which hung wrinkled and stained with the evidence of tears. Emily's thin arms were wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to fend off some invisible, menacing force. The sight was so heart-wrenching that Clara had to struggle to keep her composure. "Come in," Emily's voice emerged as little more than a fragile whisper. "Quick!" Before someone sees, Clara moved swiftly, stepping into the room and gently closing the door behind her with a sense of urgency and care. Emily's room, in stark contrast, was an opulent space of refined luxury, painted in soothing shades of pink and white. A king-size bed, draped in a silk bedspread and surrounded by an array of decorative pillows, dominated the center of the room. Expensive paintings and ornate mirrors adorned the walls, reflecting the soft glow of the lamps and creating an atmosphere of serene elegance. Yet this contrast only deepened Clara's sense of dislocation. The luxury of the surroundings felt almost cruel against the backdrop of Emily's distress. As Emily shuffled toward the bed and sank onto its edge, her posture was one of complete defeat, a sight Clara had never witnessed before. Her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world were pressing down upon her. Clara stood near the door, feeling like an intruder in a world she didn't quite belong to, unsure of her next move. "Miss Emily," she began tentatively, her voice trembling with concern. "What's happening? Is there anything I can do to help?" Emily lifted her gaze, and Clara was met with a mixture of fear, despair, and an almost palpable sense of relief. It was as if Emily was grappling internally with whether to open up to Clara or to keep her distress hidden. The struggle was evident in the way her eyes darted around, seeking solace or perhaps reassurance in the presence of someone who cared. "Oh, Clara," Emily finally murmured, her voice breaking under the weight of her sorrow. "I don't know what to do. I can't bear it anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air, charged with raw emotion, and Clara felt a surge of deep compassion flood through her. With a gentle resolve, she moved closer and settled beside Emily on the edge of the bed. The mattress shifted softly beneath their combined weight, and Clara could feel the trembling warmth of Emily's body next to hers, the subtle shivers betraying her profound distress. "Tell me what's happening," Clara encouraged softly, her voice imbued with genuine concern. She resisted the urge to drape a comforting arm around Emily's shoulders, acutely aware of the delicate line between their social statuses. Instead, she opted for a more respectful approach, hoping to bridge the gap between them with her empathy. "Maybe I can help in some way." Emily took a shaky breath, the sound of her inhalation cutting through the tense silence of the room. When she spoke, her voice was a barely audible whisper, thick with emotion and the weight of her fears. "It's my father," she began, her voice quivering with anguish. He wants me to get married." Clara's brow furrowed in confusion. Marriage was typically seen as a joyous occasion, especially among affluent families like the Johnsons. The idea of it being a source of such distress was perplexing. "But isn't that supposed to be a happy thing?" Clara inquired cautiously, her tone laced with uncertainty. A celebration. Emily's response was a bitter laugh that seemed to reverberate oddly against the opulent backdrop of the room. The sound was jarring, the stark contrast between her mirthless laugh and the room's lavish decor sending a chill down Clara's spine. "Not when the groom is chosen by my father solely to advance his business interests," Emily retorted, her voice tinged with a sharp edge of resentment. "The man he has selected is old enough to be my father, and I don't even know him. I can't." Her voice cracked, unable to continue. The anguish in her eyes was palpable, and the depth of her despair was evident in every word she struggled to articulate. The luxurious surroundings seemed almost mocking in their serenity compared to the turmoil Emily was enduring. As Emily's voice fractured once more into heart-wrenching sobs, Clara instinctively reached out and took her trembling hand, offering a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to marry someone you don't love," Clara said softly, her voice steady and compassionate. "You deserve to find happiness on your terms, not merely to fulfill someone else's ambitions." Emily's tear-filled gaze met Clara's, and within those tear-streaked eyes, Clara saw not just sorrow but a flicker of tentative hope. "You believe that?" Emily asked, her voice quavering with a mixture of doubt and yearning. Clara nodded with unwavering certainty. "Yes," she affirmed. "You have every right to choose your path and to be with someone who brings you joy. Sometimes, those in positions of power forget that everyone has their dreams and feelings too." Emily stared at Clara, her expression gradually softening from deep despair to a more hopeful, vulnerable look. "Thank you, Clara," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't think anyone would understand." Clara offered her a warm, reassuring smile. "It's my pleasure to help, Miss Emily. Just remember, you're not alone. If you ever need someone to talk to or any kind of support, I'm here for you." For the first time that night, Emily managed a small, grateful smile that seemed to light up her weary face. The oppressive tension in the room seemed to lift, and Clara felt a profound sense of relief and fulfillment. She knew that the journey ahead for Emily would be fraught with challenges, but now the young woman had a source of support to lean on. As the night stretched on, Clara remained steadfast by Emily's side, offering what comfort she could in the silence of the room. In the hushed tranquility of the opulent surroundings, where the occasional rustle of silk and the distant hum of the mansion's grandeur were the only sounds, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the vast differences in their worlds, she realized that kindness and understanding had the power to bridge even the widest chasms. For a fleeting moment, the stark divide between servant and heiress blurred, as they shared a profound, unspoken connection that transcended their roles within the luxurious confines of the Johnson mansion. The boundaries of their disparate lives seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared humanity that offered solace and hope amidst the grandeur. By the time their intense discussion had reached its conclusion, the first light of dawn was beginning to creep across the horizon, casting the sky in delicate hues of pink and gold. Clara gazed out the window, feeling an uneasy mix of fear and anticipation. In just a few days, they would set their daring plan into motion. It was fraught with risk and danger, yet it was their only chance to liberate Emily and bring Mr. Johnson's heinous crimes to light. God help us. Clara whispered silently, her heart weighed down by the immense responsibility she carried. As the three of them began to disperse, each retreating to their rooms, Clara felt an undeniable shift in the air. They were no longer simply employees and their mistresses. They were bound together as conspirators, united by a perilous shared objective and a dangerous secret. The clock on the wall ticked softly, reading 5:30 a.m. Soon, the mansion would awaken to what appeared to be just another ordinary day. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, a revolution was quietly gathering strength. Clara collapsed onto her bed, physically and emotionally exhausted, but sleep eluded her. Her mind was a whirlwind of every intricate detail of their plan, constantly replaying scenarios of potential failure. "We will succeed," she repeated to herself, trying to infuse her words with conviction. "We must succeed." Just as she finally managed to drift into a restless sleep, her slumber was violently interrupted by thunderous knocks on her door. Her heart leaped into her throat, and a surge of adrenaline shot through her veins. Before she could even fully awaken, Marcus's deep, menacing voice boomed through the wood. "Open the door right now," he barked. Marcus, Mr. Johnson's formidable head of security, was known for his intimidating presence. Clara leaped out of bed, her bare feet meeting the icy cold of the floor. Her hands quaked uncontrollably as she hastily threw on a robe over her nightgown. Panic began to consume her thoughts. They found out, she thought, her mind racing. What on earth are we going to do now? With one last trembling breath to steady herself, Clara opened the door. Marcus, a hulking figure with a perpetually stern expression, glared at her with eyes as cold as steel. "Mr. Johnson wants to see you immediately," he growled, seizing Clara's arm with a grip that left bruises. Clara had no choice but to follow him, nearly being dragged through the opulent corridors of the mansion. Her thoughts whirled in frantic disarray. Emily and Peter, where were they? Had their involvement been discovered as well? Mr. Johnson's office was an imposing and somber space, furnished with dark woods and luxurious leather. Behind his massive desk, Mr. Johnson stood, his face an impenetrable mask of barely contained fury. Emily sat in a chair beside him, her face ashen and trembling. "Leave us, Johnson," commanded Marcus, who exited the room, closing the door with a final, echoing thud. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive, laden with tension. Clara could hear her heart pounding loudly in her ears, each beat a reminder of the perilous situation she was facing. So Johnson began, his voice dangerously calm, his eyes glinting with a sinister edge. "It appears we have a traitor among us." Clara's throat tightened as she fought to keep her composure. "Sir, I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. Johnson's laughter, devoid of warmth, echoed around the room, sending a chill down Clara's spine. "Don't insult my intelligence, Clara. I'm well aware of what you, my ungrateful daughter, and that useless gardener have been up to." With a dramatic flourish, he snatched a folder from his desk and hurled it across the room. The folder burst open upon impact, scattering a collection of damning photos across the polished floor. Clara saw images of herself and Emily whispering in secluded corners of the mansion, Peter exchanging documents with Clara in the shadowed garden, and the three of them convening late at night. "You thought you could pull the wool over my eyes." Johnson's voice seethed with rage, his carefully maintained calmness shattered. "Did you believe you could interfere with my affairs and simply walk away unscathed?" The room seemed to constrict around Clara as panic threatened to engulf her, but when her gaze met Emily's and she saw the profound fear etched across the young woman's face, it ignited a fierce resolve within her. Summoning all her courage, Clara spoke, her voice quivering but resolute. "What you're doing is deeply wrong," she said, her words carrying a quiet intensity. "You can't coerce your daughter into marriage against her will, and your business dealings they're unlawful, and you know it." Johnson's demeanor shifted abruptly. He stormed around his desk, advancing on Clara with menacing strides. "You know nothing," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Who do you think you are to question my decisions? You're nothing more than an insignificant maid." Clara took a defiant step back, her heart pounding, but she refused to retreat any further. "I may be a maid, Mr. Johnson," she declared, her voice gaining strength, "but I understand right from wrong. What you're doing is morally indefensible." Johnson's laughter came again, colder and more merciless. "And what do you intend to do about it? Report me? No one would believe you." At that moment, Clara drew her ace from her sleeve. Her pulse raced as she pulled a small USB device from the pocket of her robe. "Perhaps they won't believe me," she said, her voice steady as she brandished the device, "but they will believe the evidence I hold." Johnson's expression shifted dramatically. His face turned a sickly shade of pale, and a flicker of genuine fear crossed his features for the first time. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice betraying a tremor that he couldn't conceal. "Copies of all your incriminating documents," Clara said firmly, her voice unwavering despite the tumultuous emotions within her. "Illegal contracts, records of bribes, evidence of your blackmail, everything you've used to manipulate and control others. It's all right here." As she spoke, Clara held the USB device aloft, ensuring its presence was undeniable. Johnson's eyes flared with a mixture of fury and desperation. He lunged forward, his movements swift and aggressive, but Clara was quicker. She sidestepped his grasp, her heart pounding as she took another step back. "Don't even think about it," Clara warned, her voice steady and resolute. "There are copies of this evidence in multiple locations. If anything happens to me or Emily, this information will be delivered to the authorities without delay." Johnson's face twisted into an expression of seething rage. For a moment, Clara braced herself for a physical confrontation, her mind racing with possible scenarios. But then she saw a shift in his eyes, a calculating glint that revealed a man assessing his dwindling options. "What do you want?" Johnson's voice was a low, menacing growl, each word laced with barely contained anger. Clara took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. "I want you to cease all efforts to force Emily into this marriage. Let her go, allow her to make her own choices, and stop interfering with her life. Additionally, I demand that you end your illegal activities and rectify the harm you've caused." Johnson's bitter laugh resonated through the room, cold and mocking. "You ask for quite a lot," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. His eyes narrowed as he regarded Clara, clearly grappling with the enormity of her demands. "And you think you're in a position to make such demands?" Clara's gaze remained unflinching. "It's not a matter of what I'm entitled to ask for," she said, her tone resolute. "It's about what's just and what's right. The damage you've inflicted cannot go unchallenged. You've had your way for too long, and now it's time to face the consequences of your actions." Johnson's expression hardened, his mind visibly working through the ramifications of Clara's ultimatum. The room seemed to grow colder as the tension mounted, the air thick with unspoken threats and the weight of impending decisions. Clara stood her ground, unwavering in her stance, knowing that the outcome of this confrontation would not only determine Emily's future, but also potentially dismantle the oppressive web Johnson had woven. "Fine," Johnson finally said, his voice begrudging and strained. "You want Emily's freedom and a cessation of my activities. I'll agree to those terms for now, but know this," he added, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You've crossed a line, and the consequences for that will be far-reaching." Clara's heart raced as she nodded, accepting the fragile truce. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with relief yet shadowed by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. With that, Clara turned to leave, her mind already working through the next steps of ensuring their plan's success and safeguarding their newfound victory. No, Emily's voice cut through the tense silence, startling everyone in the room. With an air of resolve that Clara had never witnessed before, Emily stood up, her posture imbued with a newfound strength. "She's not asking for too much, Father. She's simply demanding what is just and right." Johnson's gaze shifted to his daughter, and for a fleeting moment, Clara saw a complex mixture of emotions in his eyes: anger, perhaps, but also something softer, more vulnerable. Regret, shame, or maybe even a trace of guilt flickered across his face, but it was fleeting and quickly masked by his usual stern demeanor. "And if I refuse?" Johnson's voice was laced with cold defiance as he turned his attention back to Clara. Clara squared her shoulders, meeting his intense gaze with unwavering resolve. "Then, this information will be made public," she declared firmly. "Your reputation will be in tatters, your business will crumble, and everything you've built will be destroyed." A heavy silence fell over the room, pregnant with the weight of unspoken fears and looming consequences. Clara's heart raced, each beat pounding against her chest as the gravity of the moment sank in. Sweat gathered at the nape of her neck, and the oppressive tension made her feel as though the air itself was thickening. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as Johnson weighed his options. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he let out a deep, defeated sigh, the sound echoing through the lavish room. "Very well," he conceded, his voice heavy with weariness. "You've won this round. The marriage is canceled." A breath of relief escaped Emily, who rushed to Clara and enveloped her in a tight embrace. Emily's sob of relief was heartfelt, her trembling form pressed against Clara's, conveying the depth of her gratitude. Johnson's eyes remained unreadable as he watched them, his expression a mask of stoic resignation. "But don't delude yourselves into thinking this is over," Johnson warned, his voice low and menacing. "You have 24 hours to vacate this house, and if I even catch a whisper of my business being exposed," the threat was left hanging, the unspoken menace clear and chilling. Clara and Emily exchanged a glance, the enormity of the situation sinking in. They had won a crucial battle, but the war was far from over. As they prepared to leave the room, the weight of their victory was tempered by the ominous warning. Clara knew that their fight for justice was just beginning, and the shadows of Mr. Johnson's wrath would likely linger long after they had left the mansion. Clara nodded, her gaze steady and reassuring as she held Emily close, her arms encircling her protectively. "Understood," she affirmed, her voice firm despite the turmoil swirling within her. "We'll be gone by tomorrow." As they exited the office, Clara felt an intense blend of relief and trepidation. They had achieved a crucial victory in securing Emily's freedom, but at a significant cost. The road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. Where would they find refuge? How would they navigate the perilous path that lay before them? None of that matters right now, Clara told herself, her eyes resting on Emily's face, now marked by a tentative yet genuine smile of relief. What truly matters is that we are together and that we have reclaimed our freedom. The promise of a new beginning, despite its vagueness, filled Clara with a glimmer of hope. As they hurried back to their rooms to gather their belongings, the weight of their decision pressed heavily on Clara's shoulders. Yet, amidst the fear and anxiety, a sense of exhilaration coursed through her. For the first time in what felt like ages, the future seemed brimming with potential, a canvas they could shape according to their desires. And Clara thought, as a smile played on her lips, that this newfound freedom and the chance to forge their path were worth any risks they might face. The clock at the Johnson mansion struck midnight, each chime resonating like a shot fired in the stillness of the night. Clara, her heart racing in her chest, peered cautiously through the small window in her maid's quarters. The full moon hung high and luminous in the sky, casting a ghostly silver light over the meticulously maintained gardens below. It's now or never, she thought, a lump forming in her throat as she steeled herself for the challenge ahead. God help us. With the practiced precision of years spent navigating the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, Clara picked up the small backpack she had meticulously packed and crept out of her room. The service corridor stretched before her, bathed in shadows and echoing with silence, but each step she took felt amplified in her heightened state of alertness. Approaching Emily's room, Clara knocked softly on the door 3 times in rapid succession, the agreed-upon signal that she had been waiting for. The door swung open almost immediately, revealing Emily standing there. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation that mirrored Clara's own. At that moment, the gravity of their situation was palpable, the stakes high and the outcome uncertain. But as Clara and Emily shared a fleeting look of mutual determination, the enormity of their undertaking became starkly real. This was not just about escaping from a gilded cage, it was about taking control of their destiny and facing the unknown together. As Clara and Emily began to gather the last of their belongings, the silence of the mansion seemed to press in around them, punctuated only by the faint rustle of fabric and the soft thud of items being packed away. They moved with a sense of urgency and purpose, each motion imbued with the weight of their decision and the promise of a new life beyond the walls of the Johnson mansion. With one final glance at the opulent surroundings they were leaving behind, Clara took Emily's hand, and together they slipped out into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead. "Are you ready?" Clara whispered urgently, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly night air. Emily, her face pale and eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve, nodded tightly. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "Let's go before I lose my nerve." Together, the 2 women moved stealthily through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors. Every shadow felt ominous, every sound magnified in the eerie silence of the night. The floorboards creaked faintly beneath their feet, each sound sending a jolt of anxiety through Clara. She could feel Emily's trembling form beside her, the fear emanating from the young woman almost tangible. "Stay calm," Clara whispered to herself, her mind racing with the enormity of what they were about to do. "Keep it together for Emily." At last, they reached the back door of the kitchen. Clara carefully turned the handle, relieved by the quiet click of the latch. She slowly opened the door, grateful for the meticulous maintenance that had kept it from revealing a single creak. A cool breeze swept over them, carrying the fresh, earthy scent of grass and the faint perfume of blooming roses from the garden. The night was clear and still, a stark contrast to the tumultuous situation inside the mansion. Peter, the gardener, was waiting in the shadows next to an old Ford Escort. His usually cheerful demeanor was replaced with a tense focus, his dark eyes darting nervously around as he kept a watchful eye out for any signs of trouble. "Hurry," Peter hissed, his voice urgent. "We need to get out of here before anyone notices." Clara and Emily moved quickly. Clara helped Emily into the back seat, her hands shaking slightly as she ensured the young woman was safely settled. Then, she slid into the passenger's seat, her heart pounding in her chest. Peter started the engine, the low rumble of the car breaking the night's silence with a jarring intensity. As they pulled away from the mansion, Clara's eyes flitted constantly to the rearview mirror, her nerves on edge as she scanned for any sign of pursuit. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the steady hum of the engine and the soft rustle of the wind. Minutes felt like hours, each second dragging out intense anticipation. Clara's mind was a whirl of thoughts, her focus solely on ensuring their escape was smooth and undetected. The darkened houses and silent streets offered little comfort, their isolation making every shadow seem like a potential threat. As they drove further away from the Johnson mansion, the immediate danger began to ebb, though Clara's anxiety remained high. They were not safe yet, and the uncertainty of their journey ahead weighed heavily on her. But for now, they were moving away from the danger, and that was a crucial first step. Clara took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The muffled conversation between Peter and Emily in the back seat was a comforting reminder of their shared resolve. Each mile that put more distance between them and the mansion was a small victory, and Clara held onto that thought as they continued their flight into the unknown. As the lights of the Johnson mansion receded into the distance, a fragile sense of relief washed over Clara. They had managed to escape the clutches of Mr. Johnson, a feat that seemed almost too good to be true. Yet, even as she savored this brief respite, Clara knew that the journey ahead was far from straightforward. "Where do we go from here?" Emily's voice broke the heavy silence, a mixture of fatigue and apprehension in her tone. Clara turned to face her, trying to muster a reassuring smile despite her uncertainty. "We'll find a place," Clara said firmly, "somewhere safe where we can plan our next steps. For now, focus on getting some rest. You've been through so much." Emily nodded and settled back into the seat, her exhaustion palpable. Clara watched her for a moment before turning her attention back to the road ahead. The darkness of the night was thick and enveloping, but the early signs of dawn were beginning to creep over the horizon. The first light of day brought with it a glimmer of hope, a promise of new beginnings even amidst the challenges that lay ahead. Peter, the gardener, kept his eyes on the road, his grip steady on the wheel. His silence spoke volumes, reflecting his thoughts and worries about the uncertain future. Clara could sense his concern, but also his resolve to see this through. They were all in this together, bound by their shared goal and the hope for a better future. As the miles rolled by, the weight of their situation pressed heavily on Clara. They needed to find a safe place, somewhere away from the reach of Mr. Johnson's influence. They would have to plan their next moves carefully, gather resources, and stay vigilant. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but the first step had been taken. Clara glanced at Emily, who was trying to get some much-needed rest. Despite the comfort of the car's interior, the tension was palpable. Clara wished she could offer more than just words of encouragement, but for now, all she could do was stay vigilant and hopeful. The night stretched on, a blend of weariness and anticipation filling the air. With the first light of day slowly illuminating the landscape, Clara allowed herself a small moment of peace. They had escaped, and though the future was uncertain, they had taken a crucial step toward freedom. As dawn broke over the horizon, Clara felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. The journey was far from over, but they had each other, and that was a powerful source of strength. The morning light grew brighter, casting a hopeful glow over the path that lay ahead. Clara knew that they would face many obstacles, but she was determined to see this through. With a deep breath and a resolute heart, she turned her gaze forward, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. And there we have it, an intense journey of courage, determination, and hope. We've witnessed Clara, Emily, and Peter take bold steps toward freedom, overcoming immense obstacles and facing a future filled with uncertainty. What have you learned from their story? Is there a particular moment or lesson that resonated with you? How do you plan to apply this insight in your own life? We'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know one thing you've learned and how you plan to put it into practice. Your feedback not only helps us grow, but also contributes to a community of support and wisdom. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content that inspires and informs. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.